from deep in the heart of Kitchener to deep in the heart, deep in the heart of this is like my third time trying to do a cool intro. I think I'm just gonna go with what I have. You're awesome students, from what I know so far, and you've been cool and patient with me. And tomorrow's gonna be a good day because tomorrow, uh, I like the first two things on my to-do list, I should say, is to make a video for you to just go over the due dates, because I know I've been like not super clear about that. Well, not super clear meaning like not really saying at all. But basically there's going to be little quizzes for each chapter, but not chapter 1 and 2. Okay, so chapter 1 and 2, like the last chapter and this chapter, are really setting the tone. So they're going to be like important to know, but I'm trying to set up the course in a way that's going to be kind of student friendly, right? Like I'm not going to be slow to tell you when stuff is, and then all of a sudden you had stuff due that you didn't know about. Like, I know how garbage that would be, right? So what I'm going to do is you'll see that it's going to kind of unfold in a way that makes sense, and I'll present that plan tomorrow. Hopefully I'll get that out for sure, and then I'll also do the second part of this presentation, right? So my goal with this presentation now is to just sort of get this started, and I got some cool things to talk about today, and this is a pretty neat presentation. But just so you know, yeah, tomorrow or on like Sunday, I'll do a more full course overview and talk about that stuff. All right. It's weird how like things get going so fast. All of a sudden we're in like the third week, and usually I have like my course shells like built totally well and stuff, and um, yeah, so I have all the content like ready to go and stuff, and I just need to clearly set up the stuff a little bit better so that you can see it. Okay, how's that for a super long intro? Welcome to another presentation, Biological Beginnings, coming to you from Kitchener. To my people out in Nipissing, grab a hot coffee or whatever, and grab a seat, or go for a walk and throw it on your headset, whatever. Biological Beginnings. This interaction between biology and or like evolution and development, right? If this is development, right, it's like you're born and you live your life, and we call that your development. And then if we put a bunch of developments in a row, we call that evolution. And so let's look at this topic, this biological beginnings topic. Good to see you. Cheers. It's the like this. Obviously, this is like an image of fertilization, and it's like the interesting thing is, well, like one of the most wild things about life is that originally you're one egg that becomes fertilized by one sperm, and that one fertilized egg eventually, you know, creates a complete duplicate of itself that becomes two, and they're not half, they're a copy, and then that copy that is now two becomes, they each make a copy, and then that's four, and then they each make a copy, and then that's 16, and then they make a copy, and then that's 32, and then 64, and then 128, and then 265, and then whatever, 528, and then so that math might be off. Luckily that's the same size jumps as memory card, so I think I might have got that. But like as this is happening, it's like you're going all the way from this fertilized egg to this like super complicated human. Like, how's that interesting? It's like, well, how's that not interesting? As these cells are originally all just copies of the original cell. Every cell in your body has all the genetics of the original cell in it. But then obviously your cells, there's all kinds of different cells, right? There's like cells in your gut, and there's cells in, you have nerve cells obviously, and some of those nerve cells are in your head, and we call those nerve cells in your head neurons. And these neurons that can process information, a neuron is a cell that can process information. Like, what in the world does that mean? What do you mean a cell can process information? It's not like it can read or write. It's like, what that really means is it can like be hit with chemicals or electricity in a certain way and respond a certain way, and we call that it can process information. And I say they're like, who are we? Who will we be? What makes us change? How do we grow old? Why do we like the things we do? You start to realize in a subject like psychology, that's like the hardest question. It's almost easier to explain to you super complicated things than like, well, why do you like sour cream and onion chips and I like all dressed and someone else likes salt and vinegar, and my issues, those all sound delicious to me. I like basically every kind of chips except, I don't know, sometimes when they make those like pepper ones and stuff like that, I'm not a huge fan. But like, a quick way to my heart is basically, I almost took a drink while talking. That's a terrible idea. But yeah, I don't know why I'm all of a sudden telling you I like chips. But yeah, I was trying to make this point of one of the most complex, and I'm not reading off notes, just so you know. I sometimes I will be like, there will be points later, even in the second part of this presentation, where um there's a few, especially if things are a little more biological, where I just want to make sure I'm saying it right, or not saying it right, but giving you all the points. But I also often freestyle and stare and look down at my desk a lot, so it I'm trying to do that less, because I realize like every time I watch any recording I do, I always am like, oh my gosh, I'm just like just pointing my bald head at the audience the entire time. Why do we die? And damn, sorry. I don't know why that just. It's the most confusing, overwhelming, hard to conceptualize part of life. Mortality, the fact that like things aren't forever, the fact that things, not even that, sometimes it's that you know, it's hard to conceptualize the idea that we're not forever, but it's even harder sometimes to conceptualize the idea of our loved ones not being there forever, or like dealing with loss and dealing with grief and dealing with complicated grief and dealing with loneliness. And so I think I'm going to get into that a little bit more in the second part of the course. Like, there's a whole section on death and bereavement, but it's like when we talk about that topic, it's really easy to get into like philosophical and religious discussions, and obviously because that's the way humans have tried to make sense of it. It's like, since human beings have lived in organized societies, we've been burying the dead. Why do you bury the dead? It's like you bury the dead because of a belief system associated with later, and it's just like, regardless of what that belief system is, it's people have, I'm trying to make this point that like things like funeral rites and stuff are actually a manifestation of this, like the fact that we're biological beings that aren't machines that will live forever. That we, even if it's a miracle, we will live to like 110 or whatever max. I think a woman once lived to 116, I think, or something is the max. But it's in Canada, if you're a woman, I think the average is like, I think now it's a bit lower post-COVID. I think it's like 82, and I think for men it's like 79 or something. I won't keep going on that. But yeah, like, why do some people like some things? Why do some people are better at things than others? Why are some? It's like that point I started off that rant with about potato chips. It's actually kind of interesting, because it's like explaining why you like something and I don't, and I like something and you don't, is actually about as tough of a question.
Life. With an estimated 3.8 billion years of existence and evolution on Earth, it's an odd thing indeed. So how did we get here? And what would the Earth's 4.5 billion year timeline look like compressed into a normal day of 24 hours? The story begins early in the morning, around 4 a.m., with the rise of the first simple single-celled organisms. However, these organisms are destined to spend quite some time alone. At 1 p.m., a simple cell engulfs another, creating a symbiotic relationship and the first eukaryotic cells, or cells with internal organs. At 6:30 p.m., these cells begin to form colonies, and thus the first multicellular life develops. But it isn't until 8:30 p.m. that sea plants appear, and 20 minutes later we suddenly see animal life erupt in an explosion of inventiveness. Jellyfish, the first true vertebrates, trilobites. Incredible diversification begins to take place, and just before 10 p.m., plants begin to appear on land, followed by land mammals. By 1024, the Earth is covered in carboniferous forests, and the first winged insects appear. Many reptiles dominate the land with less than an hour left, but a mass extinction event allows dinosaurs to storm the scene and remain until 11:41 p.m. when they too suddenly vanish. And so begins the age of mammals. In the last few minutes, apes split from the old world monkeys, and with only 1 minute and 17 seconds left before midnight, humans emerge. All of the recorded human history fits within a few seconds, an individual life lasting barely an instant. All a culmination of 3.8 billion years of life. This ASAP Science video was made possible by the support of Audible.com. With their help, we're able to continue making fun science videos, and they want to give you a free audiobook. Audible is the internet's leading provider of audiobooks with more than 100,000 downloadable titles across all different types of literature, including fiction, nonfiction, and periodicals. Just go to audible.com/ASAP to get a free audiobook of your choice. Today's episode was inspired by the book A Short History of Nearly Everything, in which Bill Bryson explores the neatest bits of science, my personal recommendation. Again, just head over to audible.com/ASAP to download it for free or another audiobook of your choice. And subscribe for more weekly science videos.
Okay, so let's put the points up so you can write them down. And that's what I would say too, is maybe focus your note taking on like what's actually on the slide, and then I'll sort of like talk around it a bit and try to, give some context and hopefully make it, I don't know, more meaningful. It's like you're all smart people. You can only like Google a lot of this stuff. So it's like, well, what's the use of instruction? Well, in my opinion, the use of, or the role of education is to like point you towards some cool stuff and say like, hey, look at this. It's actually pretty wild to think of the fact that humans have been relatively new on this planet. That even though, you can say humans are 200,000 plus years, it's like current brain, 70,000 years. It's like once you start to think of like even 1,000 years ago, you're back in the middle of the Roman Empire. That like what 200,000 years ago means. It's mind blowing to even think of, but that in terms of like if you compare that to even something that everyone knows about like dinosaurs, you realize that like humans have been around for thousands of years. Dinosaurs were millions of years ago, and just the time scales and dinosaurs were around for millions of years. Like the dinosaurs are on the planet so like crazy longer than humans. And my point is just the complexity and the fantasticness of life and the planet are endlessly fascinating if you choose to see the beauty in it, I guess. That actually your DNA has connection to the very first eukaryote, or like the very first multicellular organism, that like you're connected to the original life, that we carry the history of surviving DNA in our own. It says there, I thought that's just a funny, an interesting point, that we share 50% of our DNA with a banana. And then you think like, well, how could that possibly be true, right? Like, but then you start to think, well, okay, well, what's the building blocks? Well, basically, it's like you've heard of the periodic table, right? There's certain elements that exist on this planet, and things are combinations of those elements. So things that are alive have a lot of commonalities with you. And something like a plant has all kinds of commonalities genetically. And then we're going to look at some point, like we're going to look at DNA. I know DNA is really like this combination of these four chemicals, guanine and thymine, and how they're sequenced. And that the arrangement of that sequence is sort of like what we call human. I'll talk more about this too. And then, yeah, and despite sharing DNA, the same DNA as billions of other people, meaning like not the same DNA, but elements of the same. It's like everybody's unique DNA, which you'd call your genome. Like your genome's like a kind of a combo of the word chromosome and gene. But your genome means like the specific information on your specific genes is unique. And it's like even if all humans are like 99% the same, and there's in that 1 extra percent is all of our differences. Everything lives in like that 1%. So this next video is about evolution. There's a weird bear scene in this that like, oh man, I don't even know why it's in there. You'll know what it is when you see it. Anyways, I'd cut it out. But anytime I try to edit videos at all, it always like messes up the recording, and then I get like, all these like copyright complaints or whatever, right? So anyways, that's why I don't trim the videos a bit better. I think I already said this in this video, so I'm sorry if I make that point repetitively. I'll try not to. Alright, next video. Yeah, sorry about that. I thought that actually the bear thing's on the next video. Um, Again, with those videos, it's like I thought that the graphic on that video, the infographic is amazing, and then at the end they have to go and make their political point about like family planning. It's like, what are you trying to say with that? Like, you're trying to say people should have less kids, and then which people specifically? It's like those ideas get a little bit meaner once you start to get more specific. But anyways, I'm not going to start making a big critique of the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, which is actually pretty cool. Pretty awesome place if you ever get a chance to go. The great Charles Darwin, who was actually quite nervous. He had, if you've heard of the book Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, his grandfather, Thomas Huxley, was Darwin's friend. They called him Darwin's bulldog. And Huxley, defending Darwin versus Wilberforce, defending the church, had like the most epic debate of all time. You gotta view it as almost like an old school battle rap in like a library. People would have been having beers and stuff, and it was like Wilberforce was like the greatest orator of the church at the time, and then you have Huxley, like the bulldog of Darwin. Yes, you could Google that online, Huxley versus Wilberforce. Darwin reasoned that an intense, constant struggle for food, water, and resources must occur amongst the young of each generation, and that a lot of them don't survive, and that the ones that do survive then are more likely to pass on their characteristics. So it's like this whole idea of what he's saying is basically just that more, and again, this is like a little easier to talk about if you move away from humans and you look like rabbits and you say, well, when rabbits are born, there's more rabbits, there's an overproduction of offspring, and having all these different offspring have little minor differences, like not be all the exact same, actually means that some of them might be more likely to, this one might be faster, this one might be stronger, this one might be able to go longer without food. Excuse me. They all might have different factors that make them more likely to survive or more likely to fit in certain situations. And the better they fit certain situations is linked to survival of the fittest, right? It's not necessarily survival of the fittest in terms of the strongest, it's survival of who best fits their environment, right? Because, for example, so you can think of a certain mammal or something that if they could go a long time without water and they're in a situation where water is really limited, those ones are going to be more likely to live. They're going to be more likely to pass on their genes, reach reproductive age, reproduce, pass on their genes, and therefore it would suggest that the gene pool would get more and more towards that behavior, that genetic ingrained behavior.
Mechanisms of evolution. What is evolution? Evolution is the development of life on Earth. This is a process that began billions of years ago and is still continuing to this day. Evolution tells us how it was possible for the enormous diversity of life to develop. It shows us how primitive protozoa could become the millions of different species that we see today. Evolution, then, is the answer to the question that we have all asked on seeing a Dachshund and a Great Dane together. How is it possible for ancestors to have descendants that look so very different to them? In answering this question, we want to focus on animals, excluding other forms of life such as fungi and plants. The first question to ask is therefore, how can one animal develop into a whole new species of animal? But just a quick question. What exactly is a species? A species is a community of animals that is capable of producing offspring with one another, with those offspring also being capable of reproducing in turn. To understand this answer better, we need to take a closer look at the following points. The uniqueness of living creatures, guaranteed through the excess production of offspring and heredity. And, as a second key point, selection. Let's begin with uniqueness. Every creature that exists is unique, and this is essential for evolution. The members of a species may strongly resemble each other in appearance, however, they all have slightly different traits and characteristics. They may be a bit bigger, fatter, stronger, or bolder than their fellow animals. So what is the reason for these differences? Let's take a closer look at a creature. Every creature is made up of cells. These cells have a nucleus. The nucleus contains the chromosomes, and the chromosomes hold the DNA. DNA consists of different genes, and it's these genes that are life's information carriers. They contain instructions and orders for the cells and determine the characteristics and traits that living creatures have. And it's precisely this DNA that is unique to every creature. It's slightly different from individual to individual, which is why each has slightly different characteristics. But how is the enormous range of DNA created? One key factor is the excess production of offspring. In nature, we can observe that creatures generally produce far more offspring than is necessary for the survival of their species, with many offspring dying an early death as a result. Often there are even more offspring than the environment in which they live is able to support. This is one factor in increasing diversity within a species. The more offspring that are produced, the more little differences occur. And this is what nature wants: as many little differences as possible. The second major cause of the uniqueness of individuals occurs in heredity itself. By the way, heredity means the passing on of DNA to offspring. Two very interesting factors come into play in this process: recombination and mutation. Recombination is the random mixing of the DNA of two creatures. When two creatures fall in love and mate, they recombine their genes twice. The first time they do this separately, when they generate the gametes, that is, sperm and egg cells. The gametes take half of the genes and shuffle them. The second recombination occurs when a male inseminates a female. The parents each provide 50% of their DNA, in other words, 50% of their unique traits and characteristics. These are then recombined or mixed, and the result is new offspring. These offspring have a random mix of the DNA and therefore the traits and characteristics of their parents. This increases the diversity and differences within a species even further. But mutations are also important for evolution. Mutations are random changes in DNA. These can also be described as copying errors within the DNA, triggered by toxins or other chemical substances or by radiation. A mutation exists when a part of the DNA is altered. These changes are often negative and may result in illnesses such as cancer. However, they may also have neutral or positive effects, such as the blue eye color in humans, which is one such random mutation. In all cases, a mutation has to affect a gamete, that is, a sperm or egg cell, because only the DNA in the gametes is passed on to the offspring. This is also the reason why we protect our sexual organs during X-rays, whilst other parts of the body are not at risk. In summary then, in the heredity process, creatures pass on their characteristics to their offspring in the form of DNA. Recombination and mutation change the DNA so that each child looks different to its siblings and receives a random mix of the characteristics of its parents. There's a key word here: random. All of these processes are based on chance. Random recombination and mutations result in individuals with random mixes of traits and characteristics, which in turn mix these randomly and pass them on. But how can so much be down to chance when all living creatures are so perfectly adapted to their environment? For example, the stick insect, the hummingbird, and the frogfish. The answer is provided by the second key point, selection. Each individual is subjected to a process of natural selection. As we have learned, each individual is somewhat different to its fellows, and there is extensive variation within a species. Environmental influences have an effect on living creatures. These so-called selection factors include predators, parasites, animals of the same species, toxins, changes in habitat, or the climate. Selection is a process that each individual is subjected to. Every creature has a unique mix of traits and characteristics. This mix helps them to survive in their environment, or not, as the case may be. Anyone with an unsuitable mix will be selected from the environment. Those with the right mix survive and can pass on their enhanced traits and characteristics. This is why diversity is so important. This is why creatures make so much effort to produce offspring that are as different as possible. They increase the likelihood that at least one of their offspring passes nature's selection process. They maximize their chances of survival. A good example of this can be seen in a group of finches living on a remote island. They are some of the most famous animals in the world of science and are known as Darwin finches after their discoverer, Charles Darwin. And this is the story of those finches. A few hundred years ago, a small group of finches was blown onto the Galapagos Islands in the middle of the Pacific, probably by a big storm. The finches found themselves in an environment that was completely new to them, a real finch paradise, an abundance of food, and no predators. They reproduced rapidly and numerously. The islands were soon heaving with finches. This meant that food supplies became increasingly scarce. The finch paradise was threatened with famine, and finch friends became competitors. This is when selection intervened. Their individuality and small differences, in this case their slightly different beaks, meant that some of the birds were able to avoid competing with their fellow finches. The beaks of some of the finches were more suitable for digging for worms. Other finches were able to use their beaks better for cracking seeds. The finches consequently sought out ecological niches. In these niches, they were safe from excessive competition. They soon began to mate primarily with other finches that used the same niche. Over the course of many generations, these characteristics were enhanced, enabling the finches to exploit their niches successfully. The differences between the worm diggers and the seed crackers became so large that they were no longer able to mate with one another. Different species emerged as a result. Today there are 14 different species of finch living on the Galapagos Islands, all of which are descended from the same group of stranded finches. This is how new species are created by evolution. Through the interaction of unique individuals, the excess production of offspring, recombination and mutation in heredity, and finally, through selection. Why is this so important? It tells us where the variety of life comes from and why living creatures are so perfectly adapted to their habitats. But it also affects us personally. Every person is the result of 3.5 billion years of evolution. And that includes you. Your ancestors fought and adapted in order to survive. This survival was an extremely uncertain thing. If we consider the fact that 99% of all the species that have ever lived are extinct, then you can consider yourself part of a success story. The dinosaurs have disappeared, but you are alive, watching this video. Because you're incredibly special, just like all the other creatures that exist today. Irreproducible and unique in the universe.
Okay, so then according to Darwin, that's what you have this term, and then I'm gonna call it a night just because it's getting a bit late, and I don't know, Old Man Mainland. I used to always like. This is year 4 doing this, and I'm still gonna work really hard, and I'm gonna do it as best I can, but I can't do the all-nighters anymore. It's like my kids get up too early for me to stay up till like 3 trying to get things rendered like saved and all that stuff. But I wanted to get at least some of it out tonight, and then I'll do the rest tomorrow, all right? Natural selection. The process by which individuals of a species that are best adapted to the environment are more likely to survive and reproduce, right? So the example I was saying before, it's like or in the video you just saw, right? It's like it's like basically how good the match is with your environment, and if that match is good enough that you can survive long enough to have an imprint on future generations. And you're only going to do that if you reproduce and become one of the successful members genetically of your species. And Darwin thought that that was such a huge pressure that it actually shaped all kinds of things like our experience of emotion and perception, and even like our entire cognitive system. All right, I have like a little video next. Yeah, actually, this video next, and then I'll kind of cut it, and then I'll start again tomorrow. All right, cheers.